Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and doing a short presentation on what I do. Just a quick, before I get started, intro on me. My name is Nadine, and I own my own business, Tumbled upon Fasting, also on social media as ilovegreenrocks. I've been cutting since I was 12 years old, and I am now 18 and have been running my business for 5 years. For my presentation today, I'm going to be doing a quick demonstration on my cutting process and how I cut a gemstone. And before I start that, I'm going to be going over how I pick my design and just kind of the basics of what goes through my head when I'm looking at a particular piece of rough. And I have a special piece that I'm going to actually be cutting for you today that I'm going to show you the before pictures and the exact design that I picked. So before I get to the specific gem that I picked for today's demonstration, I'm just going to go over some of the basic things that I'm looking at when I'm inspecting a piece of rough to figure out what I'm going to do with it. The number one thing is its natural shape. So typically when I'm looking at a particular gem, it has a rough outline, or sometimes it will have inclusions or things like that that will depict what the rough outline of the gem is going to end up being. So I look at the natural shape, and then from there I determine how deep the gem's going to be, how wide, and how long. As you can see in these diagrams, up here there's little things that have a C and a P and an L. This is the crown and the pavilion and the table, which are the different, if you're in jewelry, you'll know that the pavilion is the bottom of the stone, and the table is the top, and the crown is the second half. So I'm looking at the gem to determine, one, what can I do with those three different parts of the gem, and two, how are they going to be positioned when I'm setting up my stone to start cutting. The final kind of factor that I take into consideration that doesn't necessarily have to do with the natural shape of the gem has to do with the refractive index. Because if a gem is a lower refractive index, it's not going to bounce light as quickly. And it will be more likely to be windowed or not perform as well. Something my mentor, the person who taught me cutting, used to tell me was, if you can read a magazine through the gem, you didn't cut it right. You need to try again. So whenever I'm looking at particular materials, such as this gem right here, this is sapphire, so it has a higher refractive index, I'm able to do shallower angles because it doesn't take as deep of a stone in order to bounce that light. So before I get started on this specific piece of rough I'm going to be working on today, I just want to check in and see if there is any questions on how I pick my design.
Nadine, you have the shape of the rough, and then, as we all know, there's flaws within that rough. Do you go for perfectly clean, or do you say, I'm going to accept a flaw? Is your business model crystal clear, or is it sometimes I just let it there?
That's a great question. It really depends on the type of material I'm working with. With sapphire, it's typically sapphires or emeralds, it's more acceptable to have certain types of inclusions. I do try to, if I can, cut it out, or if I'm not able to cut it out, I try to hide it. So sometimes you can orient the stone in a way to where let's say there's another mineral inclusion, you can hide it in a way to where it's like off to the bottom or the side and you can't see it when you're looking directly down in the gem. Because the most important part is when it gets set in a piece of jewelry that you see the stone, you don't see whatever inclusion is in it.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Do you preform or do you dop and cut?
I am going to go over that a little bit, but I do typically preform all of my stones unless it's like an immaculate shape. And even at that, I have to cut a flat surface in order to dop it for the table.
Do you ever intentionally highlight an inclusion?
I have done that on particular stones, but I don't do it as frequently anymore. Sometimes if there's something really, really cool, maybe I'll put it like directly in the center. But for the most part, no.
You say you go with the shape of the rock, but if there is pleoporism,
Mm-hmm.
how you will deal with it? Like, will you take a lower price color instead of and go with the shape, or you will try to make it better color.
For sure, because ultimately it is making the gem the most valuable stone it can be. If I think that it's a stone that it's going to be more important for it to be bigger rather than whatever color would be better down a different axis, sometimes, yeah, I will prioritize that. But for stones where it's like certain sapphires, you know, say it's going to be blue or purple, probably I'm going to want the more rare of the two colors. And even if that means the stone's going to be smaller, I will orient it that way and go based off of the shape, the natural shape that I see from that axis. Is that anyone else? All right, cool. So for today's demonstration, I have a blue zircon here. This is about a 4-gram piece. And as you can see in the video, I'm rotating it and looking at the different, you know, the natural shape of the gem. You can kind of see there's a little indent right here, and that's something I'm taking into consideration. And I'm looking at this going, where can I dop it? What's going to get me the best color? And how deep is my pavilion and crown going to be? So these 3 pictures really demonstrate what I'm looking at. Right here you see I show this picture so that you can see the natural shape. I see personally like an elongated cushion, and the nice part about this particular picture is that I can see it's long and then it's rounded, and then these 2 show me the depth. The really fun thing about this stone is it's not super blocky, which some people might think, oh, it's a perfect square, it's going to make the perfect that's the perfect shape. You actually lose a little bit more weight if it's a perfect square rather than like a cone almost shape, because that's what your pavilion's going to end up being, is either like a triangular prism or a cone-shaped pavilion. So that's what these 2 pictures right here show me, is the depth lengthwise and then the depth this way. And as you can kind of see in this picture, it's kind of going like this, which is actually great for when I'm cutting. After I kind of assess the gem and look for, you know, either inclusions or problems with the shape, I preform it. Now, luckily, this gem had a really nice shape, so I didn't have to do too much to it. But I cut a flat surface right here, which helps me when I'm dopping onto my table. Dopping is my process that I use for setting the stone in place while I'm cutting, so that way it doesn't move around or mess with any of my angles. And then I also roughed around the edges right here in order to start grinding out this little indent, because if I don't take that into consideration, I could lose more weight or potential space for performance when cutting the crown. So I just kind of ground around the edges and got the exact shape, the exact measurements that I'm going to use for when I put this into my software for creating my design. So what I did was, after final inspection, before dopping the gem, I take the exact measurements and I create my design for it, which this is my favorite part of the entire process. I love having the creative freedom to be able to do what I see is fit for the gem. And as you can see, I have a video right here. This is the design I'm going to be doing on the stone today. And I used a software called GemCut Studio. I did actually learn how to initially create designs by hand, but the nice thing about this software is it allows me to mess with different angles and edit the design before I actually start cutting. So once I start cutting the gem, there's not really any going back. You've lost that material once you start cutting it. So I really like that this program allows me to edit things, get an idea of how the gem's going to reflect light, and use the yield calculator, which gives me an idea of how much weight am I going to lose if I do this design? How much am I going to lose versus performance on this design? And that's something that I take into consideration when I'm picking my design. Usually I create like 4 different designs, and then I will pick which one I see is fit best for the gem. Before I move on from this, is there any questions on how I do this?
It's beautiful. How long does it take you to, I have that program, and to say the least, I fumble. But how long does it take you to create that design in that program?
This one took me about 40 minutes. So it depends.
With it, and it's not too bad.
Yeah, I've had a lot of practice at this point now. It definitely at first took me a lot longer when I was still trying to figure out some of the ins and outs of the software. But now it takes me about 40 minutes unless I have like a really complicated shape that I'm working with.
Thank you.
Also about the software, did you use GemCAD before that, and if so?
I did not. So this was my first software that I ever started using, and before that I didn't use any softwares at all. I just did it by hand and kind of my familiarity with the indexes and angles.
Cool, thank you.
What's your preference on doping adhesive? Glue, wax, or UV?
So I am going to get to that a little bit. So I use super glue and then I use brown wax on top of it. All right, if there's no other questions.
Just one question. What was the difference? I mean, you weren't using the software before, and then you started using the software. So what advantages and how is it better? I mean, now do you always use the software before you do it?
Not always. I do kind of, sometimes I do prefer to just go along with the natural shape of the gem, just kind of create it as it's going. However, I like that the software allows me to edit and kind of get an idea of what that gem's going to look like finished. As you can see here, I was able to download a video of the design before I've even finished the gem, and this is going to be pretty close to how the gem performs when I'm done with it based off of the clarity. So it just helps me kind of mentally get an idea of what the stones should look like when I'm finished. And if I, for example, if let's say the initial design that I created, there's bad windowing or I see like a lot of dark spots, then it allows me to mess with it before I actually start cutting the stone. Because I would rather mess up on the program than to mess up on the actual gem that I'm working on.
In the GemCAD or GemCAD Studio, as far as editing the angles for your preference, is your aim brightness? Is your aim contrast between dark and light spots, or are you going for window, like get rid of the window completely, or like in the graph, which parts grab your attention the most?
It's a balance. I definitely go for brilliance first. I try to avoid as much windowing as I can in dark spots. And then after I kind of focus on brilliance, I take into consideration how's that going to affect the color of the gem.
And then second part, what angle do you like to have it not window before? You know, so I go usually about 10 degrees on my GemCAD just before letting it window. Do you like 10 degrees, 20 degrees, or?
I don't know if it's the same as my program. I kind of typically just start out with my main facets at like 42 degrees and then mess with it from there depending on the material. I cut a lot with like sapphire and zircon and garnet, so I'm kind of focusing most of my angles around that. But I typically just start out with like a base angle, and then from there we'll edit it. And GemCut Studio also has a really nice thing where it allows you to like manually change the depth of the pavilion and the crown, so that way you can adjust the depths of those two parts of the stone and see how it affects the brilliance.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Now, unfortunately, I can't cut an entire stone in just 40 minutes, although I'd love to be able to be the Flash and do that for you. This is my entire process from start to finish, just in words on how I do it, and now I'm going to show you guys how I actually start out cutting the gem. So if you guys want to come up here and see the different equipment that I use, and the zircon that you saw on the screen is up over here. Yeah, of course. So to make this a little bit simpler so that I can actually get to the fun part, which is cutting, showing you guys how I do the cutting, I already dopped the gem. So as I explained before, I use super glue to get the stone in the spot that I want. I sometimes will mark the exact spot and trying to dop it, and then I put wax around it to keep keep the gem there. I personally don't prefer using just glue or epoxy because I've noticed if I cut into the seal, it will pop off. And if the gem pops off, now all of your angles are kind of messed up and it can cause a lot of problems down the line. Now, my machine here, as you can see, I have the mast, which has different numbers, and this is basically impacting the angle that I have my stone at while I'm cutting. I have an angle degree reader right here, which has the exact number of the angle that I'm cutting at. And then I have my index right here, which is where on the stone I'm rotating, what specific facet I'm working on. For this design, I start out with the main brilliant facets, which is at 39.5 angles. Because this is zircon, zircon has a really high refractive index. I can do shallower angles, as I explained before. If this was a gem such as quartz or sunstone, I would want to make the pavilion deeper in order to minimize windowing and maximize performance.
Did you already adjust your cheater for alignment? I just see it's on like 2 or 3.
I'm going to be honest, I forgot to look at that before I started. I put it
Yes,
on there.
that's your 0.
But I'm not too worried about it. I don't typically use my cheater too much when I'm polishing or cutting. I apologize if you get splashed. Sometimes it does splash a little bit.
Are you on 600 right now? Or?
Yes. So right now I'm basically using just a 600 lab. This is a hyper edge that I really like. I'm trying to remember the exact thing. It cuts like a 600, and I really like it. Typically I would probably start out with a little bit of a coarser lap, but I didn't want you guys to get splashed with a lot of stuff, and I figured it was better to take it a little bit slow than, to go super fast and let it be really loud and all of those things. So if you guys can kind of see it there, I started cutting right here. This is going to be the first facet of the entire pavilion of the gem. And basically what I do is I just cut one on each side, and then I'm going to go to a point like this, and then I'm going to cut everything else to meet that. While I'm cutting, does anybody have any questions?
Do you use stops?
Do I use what?
Stops or stops?
The hard stuff.
Hard stuff.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
Personally, I do, yeah.
You do this thing with the same thing. Do you do that with polishing as well?
No, not usually. Sometimes with pre-polish, because I like to work a lot with sapphire, so I like to use my pre-polish when I can. I will use it sometimes just because it makes it more accurate. I notice the angles when I'm final polishing.
Do you only cut or are you jeweler too?
I don't do the jewelry part right now. I am going to be going to GIA for becoming a gemologist, but right now I just do the cutting.
So that just leads me into, so what is your preference on the girdle thickness?
The girdle thickness. It depends on the stone, but
Might
probably.
change when you start setting them.
I try not to make them too thick. I don't want them to be thin enough. If I think that I'm gonna have a problem chipping, it needs to be thicker. But I understand that a really thick girdle makes it difficult for the jeweler to set. I understand that. I do like to. Huh?
There's a lot of weight there though.
I know, it's not worth it though, most of the time. That I try to incorporate that when I'm looking at the stone into consideration, because ultimately I'm trying to make the best stone for jewelry. That's what the cutting is for. So if it's not going to be a good stone for jewelry, I kind of see it as like, well, I need to work on something. There's something I need to fix.
And how many years now have you been fasting?
I've been cutting now for, 6 years. So I started cutting at the end of 2018. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
You're spinning the handle on top, is that to raise or lower the mask?
What?
You're spinning the handle on top, is that to raise or lower the mask?
Yes. So this just is to get where this needs to be at the proper angle. Like right now you can't see it and I can't really show it to you very well, but it's at 39.59 degrees, and what I'm trying to cut to is 39.5, which is what I cut the facet on the other side of the gem to. So as you can see, it's not touching the lap, or you can usually hear it actually, which means I have it cut to, you know, a certain point, and then I'm just cutting the other side to the exact same point so that I can cut the rest of the facets to meet it.
Are you just cleaning the lap with your fingertip?
A little bit, just because I typically would use a coarser lap right now, and so there's probably a little bit more material on this lap than what I typically would have, and I don't want it to damage my lap or get everything super dirty. I'm a little bit, it's ironic that I do fasting because I like everything to be really clean. So sometimes I'm cutting and I'm like, I'm dirty.
That's part of it though.
I know.
What about your sequence outside of like the roughing and cutting? Like once you get to like the hyper edge,
Mhm.
hyper edge 3K, 60K, or are you something other kind of pattern?
Hyper Edge 60K, are you talking about polish?
What's your order? Do you do hyper edge, then 3Ks, then 60K?
Yeah, so typically I'll do my standard lap that I use for rubbing in. I just use like a, you know, basic
Topper.
plated lap, yeah. And then I will go to my hyper edge and make sure everything's precise and do all of the meat points and things like that. And then I do my 300K, and then I go to final polish. And I do it in the most part of order in which I start cutting. And then the only thing that I do slightly different is I pre-polish the girdle last. That's the last thing I do out of everything. So
You only go to pre-polish on the girdle?
most of the time. Sometimes I will do final polish
And
on
what is
it.
what grit would that be for the pre-polish?
3,000 on there. Yeah. On gems that are probably going to be worth more than $2,000, I'll do final polish just so that I feel better. But most of the time, like that's where I find I'm most vulnerable to have popping, is when I'm on the girdle. So I try to minimize the amount of polish and pressure that I have when I'm working on the stone.
When you design your design, how do you usually determine your cutting order?
Like in which facets I cut first or last or whatever. Partially from experience of what I think is going to be easiest for me, and most of the time I start with brilliant designs. I start with the main facets always. So the main brilliant facets, you know, if it's a barren cut, you know, you'll have the really deep ones on the sides, and then you'll have your other brilliant facets on top. But I always start with those main ones because it gets me the rough outline of what I'm going to do for my gem. For stones like an emerald cut, I actually usually start out with cutting the girdle first.
Do you have, I'm sure you have a favorite, which is probably a sapphire, something in that realm. What about a least favorite that you still are willing to cut for people?
That I'm still willing to cut
That
for
you're
people.
still willing to cut for people.
I don't really do cutting for other people on stones that I'm not super confident on.
Right.
That's a like, I want to make sure when I'm cutting that I'm giving you my best work.
Yeah. Will you
But
do topaz?
I love topaz.
Okay, cool.
I love topaz actually. I don't have very many issues with it. I started on it, and that's what my mentor actually had me practice on.
Yeah. And
So.
I assume you do sunstones because of where we all live, but
Well,
this is farther than us. You're more north in Washington, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm near Seattle area, but I used to live in Oregon.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I typically won't cut sunstones for other people. I have done it, and if it's a really sweet piece that I can't say no to, probably would.
Yeah.
But I definitely prefer to work with garnet. I'll do tourmaline, sapphire, you know, the harder stones, just
Yeah.
because I feel more confident being able to give you the best result possible with those materials.
is it always natural?
If I'm cutting for someone else,
Well, I mean,
or
do
for
you
me,
do-
the only time I use synthetics is if I'm practicing a new design.
Cool.
That's the only time. I don't do it for like my business. I don't do it as like for sales, because I want to make sure that people feel confident that what I'm telling them the stone is what I'm actually providing them. I'm also using this diagram. It's in blue because my computer was running out of ink. But I have different angles right here, and this is what I'm following. The nice thing about the Gem Cut Studio is that it does it for me. I'm messing with the angles, and then it just puts it in an easy format for me to print out and follow. I have my.
With a suggested cutting order.
It doesn't. It just does it in whatever I create the design in. So, but I can move it. So I can move it and write notes and do all those things if I need to remind myself about things. Sometimes I'm kind of bad about just leaving it in my head, which is why I thought it would be kind of fun to like show you guys how I create the design. 'Cause sometimes I get asked a lot, like, how do you pick it? And I'm like, you'd have to be in my head for me to be able to explain that to you.
So you designed this one for this stone.
This specific
Would you use
stone.
it for
Yeah.
something if you like it?
Yeah, if I think it will fit somewhere else, I have a whole, I didn't bring it, but I have a whole book of just designs that I like and designs I've created. And if a design doesn't turn out as good as I'd like it to, I just throw it away and create a new one. But yeah, if I think this design's really well performing and I love it, yeah, I'm gonna use it on other gems. But anyways, so I'm following the different indexes right here. It says 2, 10, 14, 12. It's kind of a pattern of different increments. I think this one's in, like with rounds, it would be consistent. You know, let's 3 notch increments between each facet. This one's a little bit different because it's an elongated cushion shape. But basically, it's just getting those main facets to come to a point, you know, and it's completely symmetrical. So.
Are you just using 96?
Yeah, that's the index that I personally prefer. I learned on a 64, but I feel like my options for designs are way more vast with a 96. And to explain what the index is, basically it's just the amount of space you can have between each facet that you're working on. So when I'm saying I used to work on a 64 index, there's wider space in between each of those notches for when I'm faceting.
Is this the exact setup you have at your workshop?
I use the same machine. I have more equipment with me at home, obviously. I have more laps and more variety in things I can use. You know, I don't use all the exact same stuff for small gems versus larger gems, or I don't even use the same polishing technique for quartz and sunstone versus sapphire and garnets, because for me, I find it just doesn't work all the same for different materials. I just brought my basic equipment and supplies that I need for this gem to be able to show you guys kind of what I'm doing. But I do use the same machine, and I love it.
What company is that?
It's Ultratech. So this one is a V5, which is one of their newer brands.
And you will go through everything on your table, right? Just to give us an idea what everything is used for, the light for, and whatnot. Sure what that is.
Which part?
The stuff on your table. I was just wondering, are you gonna go through the
So some of
dots
it's,
and everything?
yeah, some of it's not on mine, but I can kind of go quickly over some of the stuff. I guess I can leave this on. I'm so used to turning it off. So these are my different polishing laps that I personally use. The shinier one right here, it's a new Tin Plus lap. That's what I use for polishing on. This is my final polish. And then right here is my pre-polish lap, in which I use 3000. I use these diamond grits from Gear Loose. They're kind of like a paste, and I really like them because I was initially taught how to learn on like a powder kind of substance, and I didn't really care for that because it would get all over my hands, it would get in my face, and one of the things that I try to be really, really careful about when I'm cutting is like trying not to touch my face and my eyes too much, because I don't want this stuff in my eyes. It's just not as good for, you know, the long-term health of that. And I kind of need them to be able to do cutting, so the longer I can take care of them and keep them working, the better. So these are the laps I use, and then this is my main cutting lap that I use basically during the rest of the cutting process. And, oh, there's a question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Them with snake oil.
A diamond with what?
Diamond with
I
What
don't.
kind of oil you're using?
I don't use oil at all. I think it is bound with an oil for the diamond grit. I don't know what type it is. I'm going to be honest with you.
You're
But
just pressing it on your
I just put it. I just basically go.
you don't have anything?
I'll basically take the lap and just kind of go like this, and then I use water to just. Yes. So I personally prefer water because I found it's not as messy. So a lot of people do use oil, and that's a very common technique to use. But I just find that I get less stuff in my face and around my work area by using water instead. And it's really easy to clean as well.
Nadine? Hi, I'm curious, do the hyper edge laps come in different grits or is it just?
They do come in different grits. I just recently started using Hyper Edge starting last year. Before I was using an Adams sintered lap, which was a 32M or something like that, and I'm still adjusting to the different types of grits or names that they use for this. I need to look it up, and I actually plan on posting something on my Instagram with the exact one because I forgot to bring the box. But yeah, they come in different grits, and I have one that's a finer grit at home that I've sometimes used for cutting really soft stones. So if I was cutting like kunzite or something softer in that realm, I'd probably use that lap instead of this one.
I have them. I got them from Stephen Kotlowski. I don't know what his partner's name was. Yeah. And I bought this set, but I don't. Since I cut sapphires almost all the time, I don't use them.
Yeah.
Very often. But when I've used them on other stones, they are so they feel good and they cut so nice.
Yeah, I like they do cut very smoothly and they leave minimal scratching, which is scratching is the most frustrating problem I can deal with other than the stone popping off, I'll be honest. Because I don't want you guys, if someone looks at my stone and you see the light reflecting off the facets and then you see a big line going down the middle, you're gonna go, oh, that's not very nice. So that's kind of, when I'm working on the gem, I really try to minimize as much scratching throughout the entire process because it just makes my life so much easier when I finally get to polish.
When you get to polish, do you take the rubber cover off and wash it?
When I get to polish, if I'm working, sometimes it depends on how big the stone was. If it's really messy, then yes, because I don't want cross-contamination.
Yeah, I wash mine so much, you know. Well, I spray it with bleachy white, wash it, and I don't, because sometimes if when I'm polishing, if I bump it,
It will get on there.
I can flip it on there, and I'm like, and I'll see the scratches.
Yeah.
Contamination.
I luckily haven't had it. I keep my laps, all in separate containers and
Same
separate.
here.
And I found since then I haven't really had very many contamination issues. I used to have a lot of issues with that because I was taught by a hobbyist. Fastos was his thing that he did for fun, and we didn't have. It was just you leave it on the counter and it's fine. But I do try to keep it clean as possible. I could probably be better about that, but I don't have too many issues, honestly. Yeah, it's a good habit to
I
have.
can't stand scratches, so I'm like, I'm gonna make sure.
That's why I like harder gems. I don't find I have as many issues. When I'm working with softer stones, I tend to have more problems with scratching, especially since I use most of my equipment for working with harder gems.
Take off our gold for polishing too. I remove
Yeah, sometimes, yes, I see when I
It's like
watch
a
other people,
3000.
they'll just take the bowl off.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Old, I cannot. No, the hose is directly connected to the pan.
Oh,
So I
interesting.
just, lots of paper towels and cleaning.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Use this machine.
That's a really old one.
What is that material right there, the polish? You do the pre-polish and then the polishing, that's fine, right?
Mhm.
What is that lab made of?
No,
It's made out of tin.
Made out of tin.
Yeah, I personally like tin.
I see people using copper.
Mhm.
Is that different or how
Yeah.
is it so?
Copper laps, I think copper is technically a bit harder than tin on softness level. I'm
I
trying.
feel like it's softer because I just
I've-
used copper this year.
I've
but
seen that people have less problems with denting copper laps. That's just
Right.
what I've heard. But personally, I just like the way that the tin polishes. I try not to push very hard on the gem when I'm polishing it at all, so that it doesn't really break my lap, because I have, especially when working with sapphire, accidentally dented them before.
Yeah, you're right, the tin is soft.
Yeah,
I
the
do know
tin
that
is
if
soft.
I miss angle on a tin one, I have to have it resurfaced.
Yeah,
You did use, is that tin or zinc?
it's tin.
Oh,
Is that a gear loose?
Yes. I also sometimes will use my bat lap, but I prefer the tin laps for sure. And I've tried different laps. I've tried copper. Copper works. Like, you can use it. I've just found that I have like less problems, less scratching. It just polishes smoother for me to use tin.
And tin was softer than a bat lap?
I think technically yes.
I had, my scratch problem went away when I started using zinc, and it was a lap made by an Australian. And all of a sudden, the world just became a brighter place because, you know, my scratches disappeared. I even made it a double, so I used 14 on the inside, 100 on the outside, and so that the height is always the same.
Okay.
You know, cleaning is, you know, you gotta be, you know, pretty crazy about keeping the stone clean. Changing.
So it's just a preference whether you use copper or tin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, it's definitely a preference.
From what I've noticed, it seems like depending on what grit you're using, you can use one grit on two different materials and you'll get two different results. So you can kind of customize one grit for one type of material to adjust what you're expecting to get out of it.
Yeah, and I personally use them different ways. Like I score my copper laps. I don't score my bat lap or tin laps. And I use loose diamond for my copper, and I use the sticks that Nadine uses for my tin or other alloys like that. So it's kind of like having a couple different tools in your tool belt to like go after a stone. Like if someone was maybe having trouble with polishing a certain material with a certain lap, I would probably clean everything up, switch to another one, and see if that one worked, and you know, pray. You know, sometimes.
Yeah.
I
And-
personally use cereal. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have one for you.
All right.
So, I noticed that you're both putting the stone into and treadling the lap. I always tread. I wondered, you ever run into problems putting the stone into the onto the lap?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yes. So, I always cut with the stone trailing. I've been
Okay.
fasting a week. I always fast it with the stone trailing the lap. So if I'm going clockwise, then from 6 o'clock, you know,
Yeah.
along the 6 o'clock line. I noticed that you're also aiming into the oncoming lap. I'm wondering if you've ever run into difficulties with that.
I haven't personally. I've just found that's the technique that works best for me when I'm cutting. That's how I was initially taught how to do it. I don't really have an exact reason why. I just found that it worked better for me, and I try to make sure I go across the entire part of the lap so that way I don't get inconsistencies in the depth, so that I still continue to get flat facets, right? But I just find it works better for me to just kind of go like this and go across the entire lap, especially cutting wise. It makes it go a little faster.
Yeah, some
That's what I
people's rule of thumb is if it's 30 to 90 degrees, going against the grain actually removes material faster, and it won't. It's less likely to jam the machine than if it's 20 to 0. I mean 30 to 0. So for me, I'll sweep the lap fully if it's 30 to 90 degrees, and if it's 30 to 0 degrees, I won't. I'll trail only.
Yeah.
Just because of risk of jamming.
I've had stones too.
Yeah, I have too.
Yeah.
Do you remember what degree you were at? Was it in the 20s or was it at like 7?
I remember the stone.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I'm sure the lap remembers.
There's
too.
always that one gem that stands out.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
No. How did it also perfectly explain that?
Yeah.
I have a question for you since you cut Oregon Sunstone with Schiller. When you're cutting Schiller, I
depends on the color. If it's dichroic, I'm keeping into consideration that green because I really don't like. I've never had a brown stone, and I'd like to keep that streak.
Yeah.
Personally, I like, unless the stone doesn't have, if the stone has a lot of schiller in it, and I don't think I'm gonna really be able to avoid showing it off, I'll just do it across the top of the surface and just show off. Yeah, just do it, show it off, and if not, I'll try to just go wherever I can maximize the color, but minimize the amount of schiller that's up top, so that way you still get the brilliance and fire out of the stone. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah.
I have another oddball question. Having faceted as a female for a very long time in this industry, how many female facetors do you run into?
Not enough.
No, not as many.
That's what I'm finding.
Not as many, but
It's an interesting field to be in. It's a very male-dominated field, and so I'm just curious what you.
yeah. I've definitely met a couple, and I'm always happy to like meet other females in the industry, and I just like working with. I'm gonna be honest. I like bouncing ideas off of everybody.
Same. I'm the same.
Anybody
So
who it is, I'm
over-
like, so what do you do?
Yep. I'm in Spokane. You're in Seattle area.
Yeah, so I'm in Linwood right
Okay.
now.
I
Yeah.
love it. Oh, hey.
Oh.
And you're a faceter too? I love it.
Awesome. That's so cool. Yeah. Oh,
I am
awesome.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love my Ultra Tech. I originally started out. I lived in Tri-Cities
Yeah.
for like 6 or 7 years. So that's where I actually learned faceting. Was my mentor lives there.
Oh, great.
So
I love
Being that you're the youngest female professional gem cutter probably in the United States, you're probably like extremely inspiring to a ton of people, which is awesome.
thank you.
That's one of the big reasons so we have so many fans who actually go on. But have you thought about putting together maybe a design book or something like that?
That would be a lot of fun. I've considered it.
Especially being such a, like, because you could have a book published at a super young age, you know, and I think it'd be a cool marker for, like, especially where you're at now, you're transitioning between high school and going to GIA, and you've been a professional stone cutter for years now, you know?
Yeah.
It might be cool.
It would be a lot of fun. I'm not sure if I have the time right now to
Right.
be able to put that together.
Yeah.
I'm always doing something. I tell people all the time, my brain works at 2 times speed. I'm always off to the next thing and learning something. But down the road, that's a potential. I love creating my designs, and I love
Yeah.
sharing. So
It'd be a
and teaching.
cool way for people to be able to support you without having to be able to buy one of your gems, you know? It might be like
Sure.
a $60 to $100 support thing that they can have a piece of your
Yeah.
work as well, you know?
100%. I
Yeah.
understand that. I mean, I get not everybody wants to spend $1,000, $900 on a gemstone, or
Especially for like younger people, you know?
but probably that would have to be something I think about definitely more in the future. I have a couple other plans that I'm hoping to get working on before I get to things like that. So, but right now I'm just cutting away and learning more about the gems and the gem science as I'm going to GIA, because that's initially how I kind of got invested, was through the science of it all. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to that stuff. Yeah, I plan on taking the 6-month program there. So, yeah, I'm very excited.
Are you interested in doing jewelry?
I would like to know how to do it, just because one, I like learning, and I work with a lot of jewelers, so I try to understand their point of view when they're looking at a stone. Ultimately, I don't think I'm quite artistic in a way to where I could do like the actual designing. My brain just, I don't think, kind of works that way. But I definitely want to know how to do it. And